Ajam nirvikalpam nirakaramekam niranandamanandamadvaita purnam param nirgunam nirvishesham niriham parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema parabrahma rupam ganesham bhajema. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaste. Welcome to session 106 of Bhagavad Gita verse by verse. Today we'll start study of chapter 14, which is named as Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, and take up verses from 1 to 7. After the class, we'll have chanting of these verses by Srimati Radharavi. Now, Dr. Anupama will take us through the Mundaka Upanishad verses we studied in our last sitting before Dr. Hegde gives us the introduction of the today's topic. Over to you, madam.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A recap of Mundaka 2, Khanda 2, verses 1 to 5. This first mantra is a Mahavakyam, as it equates Tat Mahat, meaning the Paramatma, or Sat, the Tat Padam, with Avihi Sannihitam Guhacharam, the Chit, the Jivatma, or Tvam Pada Lakshyartha. This means Chit Eva Sat, Sat Eva Chit, the inference being Yat Etad Atra Samarpitam. I, the consciousness, am the very Adhishtanam of everything, and being all-pervading, everything is localized in me, the consciousness Atma. Brahma eva aham, idam jagatcha sakalam, chinmatra vistaritam. This means the essence of the world is the essence of me. This implies that everything, every being in creation is based on Brahman. Yet, etad atra samarpitam. This Brahman is with or without form, sadasat. It is the greatest thing to be sought, varishtam varenyam, and it is beyond the comprehension of lay people. Yad prajanat vijñānat param. In conclusion, this Brahma Jnanam is the most exalted to be sought after, varishtam varenyam, because it is nityam. This knowledge is distinct from the realm of worldly or objective sciences. The Guru says, O disciple, may you recognize this Brahman and become free. Mantra 2 describes Aksharam Brahman as Yad Archimat Bhavat, self-effulgent. Yad Anubhya Anubhavat, subtler than atoms. Yasmin cha loka cha lokina nihitaha, on which the world and all living beings are based. Tad etad satyam bhavati, tad amritam bhavati. This Aksharam Brahman is the truth. It is immortal. Tad vedavyam saumya tvam vidhi. The Guru says this is mandatory knowledge. The gist of this mantra is Brahman is the support of everything, but Brahman and everything gives the impression of two entities, Adhara, Adheyam relationship. This must be understood as waves, H2O, are based on water, H2O, implying Brahman alone appears in the form of everything, Advayam. The Guru Angiras tells his student Shaunaka, Yad Archimata, Tad Vedavyam. Vedavyam here means strike, to know, intending to build up the momentum for the archery analogy in the subsequent verses. Know that self-effulgent Chaitanyam, Archimata, to be I, the witness consciousness, which alone appears in the form of the observed world also. Mantras 3 and 4 are also Mahavakyas, which use the archery analogy. These mantras give us the details of comparison between archery and Brahma Vidya. The bow of Pranava, Omkara, Pranavo, Dhanuhu, the arrows compared to Jivatma, the seeker, Sharohi Atma. And who is this Jivatma? Brahmastha, Brahman enclosed in the body, as Krishna has described, Paramatmeti cha yukto dehe asmin Purusha param. Brahmata lakshyam uchyate. Brahman is the target or destination of that Jivatma. And who's the archer? It's not mentioned here. Let's assume it's the Guru. What is the relevance of this comparison? The means or facilitator, the Pravesha Karanam, in archery is the bow, and in Brahma Vidya it's Pranava or Omkara. Next, the quality of instrument. The arrow should be straight and sharp. Jivatma should be samskriya manaha. As Krishna says, aneka janma samsiddha. He should have jnana yogyata through karma and upasana yoga. Third, the practice is needed for proper anchorage of arrow upon bow, and so also Jivatma has to do Omkara Vichara. This Omkara Vichara could mean Prapanchatraya Vichara, Avastatraya Vichara, or as in Mandukya Upanishad, the Akara representing Prathama Pada, Vishwavirat, the Ukara representing Dvitiya Pada, Taijasya Hiranyagarbha, and the Makara, Tritiya Pada, Prajña, Ishvara. Each of these pairs resolved into Turiyam. The culmination of Omkara Vichara should be Aham Brahma Asmi. The Jivatma is refined by the removal of Ajnana, Samshaya, and Viparyaya, which means vasanas in the form of Deha Vasana, Vishaya Vasana, meaning identification with possessions, obligations, relationships, and transactions, port, and Shastra Vasanas, meaning obsessions with Sanskrit grammar, etc., missing the message or tatparyam of the Shastras. What is the result of this practice? Just as the arrow strikes the target perfectly, Jivatma merges with Paramatma. Apramattena lakshyam brahma vedavyam means, with the help of this refined mind, the target Brahman must be struck by me, the Sakshi Asanga Chaitanyam, in the form of a thought, a conviction, Aham Brahma Asmi. Sharavat Tanmayo Bhavet. Just as the sharp arrow remains anchored in the target, Jivatma, as Sakshi Asanga Chaitanya, merges with Paramatma by dissociating with the mind. The Jivatma now looks upon himself as Aham Brahma Asmi, Advaita Atmanishta, soaked in Paramatma permanently, Tanmayo Bhavet. This is the phalam of Brahma Vidya. This Sakshi status is lost when I identify with the mind because I become a Pramata. The moment I slip, samsara is waiting to swallow me. Mantra 5 is also a Mahavakya which is analyzed in the Brahma Vidyam. The gist of this verse is, there is only one Chaitanyam, which is the Adhishtanam of both the macro universe, meaning heaven, earth, etc., and the micro, meaning body-mind complex. The universe is compared to a cloth, Brahman being the thread, the warp, otam, and woof, protam, meaning Brahman is the Adhishtanam. This defines Brahman as Satyam and Jagat as Mithya. The Guru says, know that Ekam Atmanam Eva, the non-dual Brahman. Give up everything else, all Aparavidya. This is the means to immortality. This setu or dam can quarantine a mukta or liberated Purusha from the whirlpool of samsara forever. This alone is moksha. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anupama, for a nice recap of the verses that we studied in the last class on Mundaka Upanishad. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. We begin the study of the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita titled Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. Before we enter into this chapter, I thought as part of a revision of the whole Bhagavad Gita, let us look into certain verses we have already studied in the earlier chapters, where Sri Krishna brings in the chapters of the Gunatraya. The first is in the verse 45 of the second chapter, which goes like this: Traigunya Vishaya Veda. the Vedas, particularly the Veda Purva, the subject matter of the Veda Purva, Vishaya Veda, is Trigunya. So the Veda Purva talks a lot about the importance of the three gunas. But what is Krishna's advice to Arjuna and to all of us? Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna. This is the key message. Although the chapter is called Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, in some places it is also titled as Gunatraya to Guṇatithaḥ. The more we understand the Gunatraya, our objective is to become Guṇatithaḥ. That means free from all the gunas. Shri Krishna advises straight away in the first verse, Nistraigunyo Bhavarjuna, Nirdvando Nitya Sattvastha. All the time be anchored in Sattva, Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. Let the focus be on recognizing our true nature as Atma, and let the focus not be too much on yoga and kshema. That is all worldly, to be having more and more acquisition and to preserve all that we have acquired. Now, when we come to the 13th chapter, Shri Krishna is describing who is the one who does all the karmas. This is the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Prakriti kriyamanani guna karmani sarvasha. All the karmas are done by the gunas born out of Prakriti. Ahankara vimudatma karta aham iti manyate. The ignorant person, this person who's spiritually ignorant, who's not aware of one's true nature, that I am Atma Brahma, and under me are all these gunas and the body-mind complex. Because of the ignorance, a person thinks I am the one who's doing all the actions. On the other hand, Shri Krishna in the next verse says, Tattva vittu mahabhavo. On the other hand, Arjuna, Krishna says, Tattva vit, that means the knower of the truths. Know about guna karma vibhagayo. Know about the nature of guna and karma. And what do they know? Guna guneshu vartanta. The gunas will interact. The sense objects will interact with the sense organs, and the sense objects will have their own interaction. You have to stand apart. Iti matva na sajjate. Don't get too attached to what the body-mind complex has to do. And in the next verse, Shri Krishna has an advice for those who have had some spiritual wisdom. Prakriti gunas sammudha sajjante guna karmasu tan akristna avido mandan krishna vinna vichalayati. That means those who have spiritual knowledge should not cause confusion to those people who are not spiritually evolved. You know, for a person who is not spiritually evolved, don't ever criticize them. So it will take some time to understand about our higher nature. So Shri Krishna is warning those people with spiritual knowledge. Then there is a big jump, and I hope I have not missed any other verses. If I have missed, please bring it to my notice. We come to the 7th chapter, where there are at least 3 verses in the 7th chapter where Shri Krishna talks about the Gunatraya. Traibir Gunamair Bhaver Yebihi Sarvam Idam Jagat. This whole world is under the trap of these 3 gunas. And because of that, what happens? Mohitam na vijanati, na abhijanati. So they are deluded and they are not aware. They are not aware of what? Mam ebhya param avyayam. They are not aware about the true nature. They are not aware of their higher self. They are not aware about me, who is param, who is the highest, and who is non-changing. For example, when you go to a movie, you see the blank screen, but because of the so much characters that are projected and the music and all that, we get so involved on that mithya characters and forget the adhara, that which is higher and that which is supporting. And that is why we can get deluded by all these gunas. So Sri Krishna continues to warn in the 7th chapter about some more aspects about these gunas. He says, Daivi hi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya. These divine gunatraya, which is born out of my Maya, it is extremely difficult to cross over. So what is the suggestion Shri Krishna has? Mam eva prapadyante. Those who surrender to me, those who become my bhaktas, mam etam tarantite. I will help you to cross. So here is the introduction to bhakti. And there is no greater sadhana than bhakti to help over to cross the 3 gunas of Maya. We come to what we have recently studied, the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where there is again an introduction. Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidyanadi Ubhavapi. So both Prakriti and Purusha, Shri Krishna says, please know they are beginningless. They are anadi. Vikaramscha, they undergo a lot of modification, the Prakriti aspect of it. Vidhi, please know that the Prakriti aspect in all of us is the one that undergoes a lot of modification. And it is full of all the gunas which are born out of Prakriti Sambhavan, which are born out of Prakriti. Again, another warning, don't get too attached to these gunas. But if you get too attached to them, they will determine your future birth. Purusha, that means the higher nature of you, Prakritisto, Prakriti, anchored within the Prakriti, he bhunkte, experiences Prakriti Jan Gunan. That means our higher nature, the Atma within me, using the Prakriti, using the body-mind complex, experiences all these gunas which are born out of Prakriti itself. Karanam guna sanga esha, because of the sanga, because of the attachment to these gunas, sadasad yoni janmasu. This is the cause of your future janma. That means there is less attachment to these gunas. You will have more refined birth, more attachment. It goes into lesser birth. So we have some understanding of gunas already from the previous verses. With that background, let us enter into the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The opening 2 verses will be explained to us by Colonel Vijayan. Over to you, Colonel Vijayan, sir.
Thank you, sir. Shri Guru Bhyo Namah. Hari Om. Chapter 14 is a detailed explanation of the following teaching presented in the preceding chapter. 1. Whatever be, moving or stationary, is born out of the union of kṣētram and kṣētrajña. 2. Attachment to gunas is the cause of birth in superior or inferior wombs. Atma, my true nature, which was presented as witness principle in the preceding chapter, is revealed here as an attributeless Nirguna tatvam, the Guṇatithaḥ. And everything that has gunas or attributes is anatma, or saguna tatvam, or gunatraya. Hence, this chapter is named Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. Chapter 14 also addresses few things as what are gunas, what manner will each guna bind us, how can we detach from these gunas, what transformation occurs in a Guṇatithaḥ. Of the first 2 verses, the first verse glorifies Jnānam and the second verse defines phalam. The verse goes, Shri Bhagavan Uvachaha Param Bhuya Pravakshyami Jnānānam Jnānam Uttamam Yajnatva Muniyahas Sarve Param Siddhamito Gataha. Bhuya Pravakshyami. Bhuya means again, Pravakshyami, repeat the same teaching. I shall once again give you the same teaching. The teaching of Atma Jnanam again and again is called Abhyasa. Abhyasa is an alankara for the Guru. It is a tatparya lingam which is considered compulsory on the part of the Guru because the student will grasp more and more when the subject is repeated. Param Uttamam Jnanam. It is the greatest knowledge in the world. Param means greatest. Uttam also means greatest. Shankaracharya brings out the subtle difference between the two superlatives. The first greatest represents the subject matter, Vishya Drishtya Uttamaha, the Paramarthika Satyam. The second one refers to the Paladrishti, also Uttamam, that is moksha. Mundaka Upanishad calls this knowledge as Paravidya. Chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita calls this as Rajavidya. Jñānanam. Jnanam mentioned here should not be confused with the values mentioned in 8 to 12 verses of the preceding chapter. Here it means Paravidya. Sarve Munayah. Munayah means the seekers who have got all the necessary qualification in abundance. Sadhana Chatushtaya Sampannaha. All the time, totally dedicated and immersed in Vedanta. Param Siddhim means Param Purushartha, the highest accomplishment. Gata iti, liberation, moksha. Iti means after death. Here the reference is to Vedeha Mukti. While living, we call it Jivan Mukti. Liberation after death is called Videha Mukti. These people have attained both. Verse 2. Idam Jnanam upasrityaha mamam sadarmayam agataha sarge api na pajayante pralaye na vityanti cha. The gist of the verse is that one who has gained this knowledge will look at himself only as an Atma or Brahman. Upasrityaha idam Jnanam. By taking recourse to this knowledge, by acquiring this knowledge, agataha mamam sadarmayam. The seekers have attained oneness with me. Mama sadarmayam means Ishvara Swarupam, Purnatvam, Ananda Swarupam, Abhayam. These people enjoy their inner sense of self-sufficiency even while living. They become free from the sense of insecurity. A jnani by this knowledge is no more a slave of karma phala. Sadarmayam indicates Jivan Mukti. So even while living, they enjoy the glories which belong to the Lord. Sarge apina upajayante. Even during creation, na upajayante, they are not born. Videha Mukti is defined here. They are not born again as miserable individuals, and therefore Sarge means the next Srishti. They are not created again. They become free from the cycle of Punarpi Janam, Punarpi Maranam. Pralaye na vyatanti chaha. Pralaye during dissolution, na vyatanti, they do not suffer. They do not come into grief caused by mortality. So Bhagavan says, therefore Arjuna, if you want to enjoy this Jivan Mukti and also get the benefit of Videha Mukti, concentrate on this Jnanam. Hari Om. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Colonel Vijayan sir, for a nice explanation of the first two verses. As usual, Krishna has a very unique style of praising what he's going to teach. He says, I'm going to teach you something once again. Although I have taught you this before, and again, as explained by Colonel Vijayan, whenever some topic is very subtle and difficult to understand, the teacher repeats this. That is why it begins with the word bhuya. Bhuya means I will once again teach you. What am I going to teach you? Jnanam uttamam, the highest knowledge. I'm going to teach you Jnānanam, of all the knowledge, the highest knowledge. And once you are able to attain that, that means Munayaha, those who have the required qualifications will be able to attain to the highest. And what is the highest? He will explain in the next verse. Upashrita, that means you have to resort to this. You have to commit to get this knowledge. That means you should understand all these three gunas and use that as a stepping stone to move to our true nature, which is Guṇatithaḥ. Once a person realizes that I am Guṇatithaḥ, you discover there is no birth, there is no death. And when there is no more birth and there is no more death, you have attained two important goals in life, Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti. And that is the grand introduction we have to the 14th chapter. We have Padma, who will explain 2 more verses. Over to you, Padma.
Hari Om. Verses 3 and 4. Mama yonir mahat brahma tasmin garbham dadamyaham sarva bhava sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. The great Prakriti is my womb. I place the seed in that. Thereupon takes the origin of all beings, O Arjuna. Sarva yoneshu kaunteya murteya sambhavanti yaha tasam brahma mahad yonihi aham bija pradhan pitah. O Arjuna, whatever forms are born in all the wombs, for all of them, the greatest Prakriti is the womb. I am the father who provides the seed. In the earlier verses, Lord Krishna gave us an insight to Atma Jnanam, and now he touches upon creation. He says that all the jivas are embodied beings, originate by the combination of Prakriti tatvam, the material substratum pervading physical existence, and the Purusha tatvam, the eternal consciousness. Purusha tatvam is Nirguna, Navikara, Satya, Chetana tatvam, and Prakriti is Saguna, Savikara, Achetana, Nitya tatvam. He says the cause of creation as none other than Ishvara himself, a combination of Purusha tatvam and Prakriti tatvam, that is eternal consciousness matter, and also the Brahma tatvam and Māya tatvam. In chapter 13, verse 9 too, Lord Krishna says the combination of these two is the cause of creation of the entire universe and is called Ishvara and is Anadi, that is beginningless, and themselves are not an entity, a created entity. Symbolically, the Purusha Tattvam is referred to as the father principle and Prakriti is referred to as the mother principle. Swami Paramathanandaji, quoting from the Purana, says that goddess Parvati cannot be separated from Ishvara and is termed Ardhanarishvara and are the cause of progenitors of universe. This is to indicate the inseparability of Purusha Tattvam and Prakriti Tattvam in all jivas. And this combination is called Ishvara or God. Swamiji also quotes Shankaracharya's lines of the first verse of Saundarya Lahari, which goes, Shiva Shaktya Yukto Yadi Bhavati Shakta Prabhavitu Nachedevam Devo Nakhalu Kushala Spanditumapi. Meaning, Parmeshwara becomes capable of creating the universe only when united with Shakti. When not joined by her, he is incapable of creation. Therefore, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Mama Yonihi, in my womb. Here, womb refers to Prakriti or Māya. Mahat Brahma. Mahat means which cannot be limited. Brahma denotes the expansive material energy and Prakriti. Mama Yonihi, the Prakriti, my womb. Aham Dadami, I place Garbham, the seed in that, the seed of consciousness from the Lord, to give birth to life forms. Jiva, Sarva Bhutani, of all beings, Sambhavati, originate or evolve from. Therefore, all the creations, Jiva, are the children of Brahma plus Māya, consciousness plus matter, Nirgunam plus Sagunam. We have seen that every individual Jiva creation is a combination of Purusha Tattvam, that is father principle, and Prakriti Tattvam, the mother principle. And this combination is the cause of creation, and all creations will have the feature of both the Tattvams in all forms and species. This combination is determined by the will of the Supreme Lord and is not accidental or random one, and also manifests due to circumstances based on individual karmas of creations. Aham bija pradhana pita. I am the universal father who provides the seed, who activates, who enlivens Māya with his Chidabhasa Pradhena, with his reflected consciousness in the womb. Mama Brahma Yonihi, as in the previous verse, Mama Yonihi, the infinite Māya is the womb, Yonihi. Sarva Yonishu, Māya becomes the universal mother for all species. So Lord Krishna says, Sarva yonishu yaha murteyaha. Murti here means body, shariram. Therefore, in all wombs and creation, both Prakriti tatvam and Purusha tatvam, that is, matter and consciousness exist, from the most evolved jiva to the least evolved jiva, such as the one-cell amoeba. Hari Om. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Padma. That was a nice explanation of the third and the fourth verses. So Shri Krishna is, after giving a grand introduction, is trying to help us to understand that all of us have come from the father and the mother principle. The father represents Purusha or consciousness, and the mother represents the Trigunatmika Māya. And therefore, for transactional purposes, we have this body-mind complex, which is extremely important. But all the time, remember that I am someone other than my body-mind complex. This is the message that will come in and through all the verses of this chapter. Verse 5, Chandrakala, please. Dr. Chandrakala.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Next slide, sir. We have learned from the previous two verses that every aspect of creation is a mixture of consciousness and Prakriti. So we have learned about father principle and Purusha blesses or activate mother principle, Prakriti or Māya. This is what Lord Krishna tells Arjuna to become Ishvara, which is a god of creation. Next slide, sir. As Ishvara is a mixture of both consciousness and Prakriti, we are also a mixture of Prakriti and consciousness. We have already learned Prakriti tatvam is body, mind, sense complex, and Purusha tatvam is a consciousness principle or a Sakshi principle. Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Ahamkara is your lower nature. You have to own up your higher nature, that is Sakshi nature. Next slide, sir. So we know the nature of consciousness. This consciousness principle is Nirvikara, Nirguna, Sakshi tatvam. This is our higher nature. Next slide, sir. As Prakriti is integral of our composition, let us understand its gunas. So, why it is important? We can handle them correctly. Guna has two meanings, property or an attribute. The second is rope or a shackle. Even the most inert object in the creation has three gunas. Next slide, sir. Three gunas are Sattvika Hamkara, Rajasa Hamkara, and Tamasa Hamkara. Nature of each guna, how it binds a person, the consequences of the respective bondage, we learn in this chapter. Hence the name Guṇatraya Vibhaga Yogaha. Next slide, sir. Coming to the verse 14.5. Sattvam rajastama iti guna prakriti sambhavaha nibatnanti mahabaho Dehi dehinam avyayam. Come to the word meaning. Sattva, Raja, Tama. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Iti gunaha. These are the three gunas. Prakriti sambhavaha. These are born of Prakriti, O Arjuna, Mahabaho. The three gunas, libadnanti. That is, the three gunas bind. What does it bind? Dehe, the self, which is of the nature of avyayam, that is changeless, where dehinam, in the body. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, these are the three gunas born of Prakriti. They bind changeless self in the body, O Arjuna. Next slide, sir. So let us now come to the character of each gunas. Sattva guna here, the person who has predominantly Sattva guna is Jnana Pradhana Purushaha. It makes the person cognitive, intellectual, where Jnanendriyas are active there, where that person is turned inwards, intellectually active, analyzing, thinking and expressing in the form of Nivritti Pradhana. Coming to the Rajasic Guna, where it is Karma Pradhanaha. So where Karmendriyas are active, this person is highly turned outwards. He loves socializing, interacting, and he expresses the nature of Pravritti Pradhana. He cannot withstand silence. If I come to Tamoguna, it is just the opposite, where suppression of both Sattva and Rajas will be there. Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, all these gunas leads to bondage. Next slide, sir. Next slide, sir. So we all understood all these gunas cause bondage. How does that cause bondage? It is by addiction to the setup. These gunas bind one to one's lower nature, that is ahamkara, so which has 3 defects. What is that? BAD, bad. All 3 gunas are mixed with pain and sorrow. Dukkha mishri tatvam. If I take sattvic mind, that person seeks a tranquil atmosphere and seclusion which is conducive for thinking, contemplation, etc. If that setup is disturbed, a sattvic mind gets upset. This mind also is bound mind because it cannot totally control the setup. The same with rajasic mind, where when the setup goes out of control and there is unhappiness. The same with even tamasic mind as well. So all these will have problems. In tamasic mind, there is no scope for progress at all. The second defect is bandhakatvam. This addiction to a particular type of setup causes dependence and bondage. Coming to the third one, attributekaratvam. A sattvic person, he wants to gain more and more knowledge. And rajasic person, and he wants to achieve more and more. Without that, they are not happy, they are not satisfied. Coming to the next slide, sir. So these 3 gunas causes bondage. So it is important for us to know that all these 3 gunas are important for us. Tamo guna is important to get sufficient rest and recuperation. Rajo guna is important to follow the karma yoga. And sattva guna is important to achieve jnana yoga. As long as I claim to be lower I am bound by those gunas. Hence, I should claim my higher nature, then gunas don't bind me. So becoming Guṇatithaḥ is just an intellectual cognition. So these gunas are very essential in the initial period of spiritual growth, as much as pole is very important for pole vaulter. So Lord Krishna says, use it intelligently as a stepping stones. Finally, transcend the gunas to own up your higher nature, to become Guṇatithaḥ, which is the nature of a liberated person. Next slide, sir. In the next slide, we will learn more about gunas, that is lakshanam, bondage, and how to find out which guna is predominant. We learn in the following verses. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakala, for a nice and a comprehensive explanation of an important verse. And you will see how much Sri Krishna has packed in this particular verse, where all the 3 gunas have been described, and more important, Nibadnanti Mahabhavo. Oh Arjuna, all of us, that these gunas, whether it is sattva, rajas or tamas, can bind whom? Can bind the atma, which is really avyayam. Avyayam means of the nature of, it is something infinite. It cannot be destroyed, but still the impossible becomes possible because of these 3 gunas. So there is a description and there is also a warning. Karthik will explain verse 6. Karthik, please.
Good evening. In this sloka, Krishna defines sattva guna and explains how it binds a person. Tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakam anamayam sukha sangena badnati gnana sangena cha anagha. Among these, O Arjuna, sattva is illuminating and without affliction, because it is pure, binds by connection to pleasure and connection to knowledge. The first line of the shloka gives the lakshana, and the second line gives the prakara, that is the method of bondage. And also one thing, with respect to the jagat, guna means nature or quality, and with respect to a jiva, guna becomes the rope / shackle and that which binds. Now, sattva and a sattvic person, what are his or her dispositions, or what drives a person with sattva dominant ahankara? The mind turns inwards towards its processes. What we experience as connection, love, or abidance to values, or being just plain cheerful, sattva guna is dominant. The clarity of thought is there because sattvic mind is a pure reflector of awareness. He or she sees without confusion. There is thirst for more knowledge, intellectually very active, analyzing or thinking and hypothesizing all the time. Hence, the person values silence, quietude, or peace. He values calmness and very, very sensitive to environment. He is a naturally contemplative person. However, when there is a fall or lull in the input of knowledge, a sattvic person feels limited. Thus, he strives all life to remove this limitation by acquiring more knowledge, more and more knowledge. So it is highly likely that he or she converts Vedanta into an academic pursuit. The Jnana Indriyani are very active, ongoing absorption of information, and he easily learns, absorbs, and retains. Amedha Shakti, Grahana Shakti plus Dharana Shakti. Such a person is called a sattvic person. Next slide, Doctor. Now, let us look at each of these attributes as in this shloka. Nirmalatvat. Mala means impurity. Nirmala means without impurities. In this case, what is the impurity or contaminant? It is Rajoguna and Tamoguna. So when Sattva-guna is dominant, the other two gunas will not contaminate, influence or pollute Sattva-guna. That is Nirmala. The next word, Prakashakam. Now, Tamoguna stands for being dull, ignorant. When Tamoguna contaminates Sattva, the mind will become cloudy. We've heard of this, Avarana. But when Tamoguna does not influence the mind, the mind will be clear. So there will be a natural clarity of thought. Such a mind will be bright and illuminating or prakashakam. Anamayam. Likewise, Rajoguna, it stands for activity, more so sustained activity all the time. So when Rajoguna contaminates Sattva, the mind cannot relax and will be restless, wanders and wavers. We have heard of this Vikshepa Shakti. But when Rajoguna does not influence the mind, then it is free from tension, stress and strain. Or it is said to be Niramayam. Amaya is sickness. Here, the sickness is a restless mind. Niramaya is freedom from such a sickness. So, Prakashakam means not contaminated by Tamoguna. Niramayam means not contaminated by Rajoguna. Now, with all of these wonderful qualities and a wonderful disposition, the sattvic person should be on top of the world. Yes, he is on top of the world, but yet not a gnani. Why? Next slide, Doctor. Sukha sangena badnati. Krishna says, Sattva guna is also bondage because the sattvic mind seeks peace, seeks tranquility from excessive external activity. But one can never control external atmosphere. If one is over-dependent on seclusion and calmness, he becomes distressed when that setup is disturbed. Setup and, the Swamiji's favorite thing, setup you reverse and it becomes upset. So quietude becomes the source of dependence or bondage. Secondly, a person with sattva dominance goes after subtle pleasures. Subtle pleasures in the meaning of meditations, spiritual sadhanas, innovation, philosophizing. So if we remember the kosha, subtle pleasures is reflected ananda in Anandamaya kosha. That is also not a gnani. A gnani does not depend even on quietude or silence for security, peace and happiness or fulfillment even. Now the next phrase, jnana sangena badnati. A sattvic person is also attached to the pursuit of knowledge. He suffers from discontentment in his quest to become omniscient. He is frustrated with his limitation. He is trapped in intellectual samsara. Further, a person with sattva dominance is never satisfied with knowledge gained because identity is placed in sattva guna oriented ahankara. That is more knowledge, a bigger I, and bigger the I, further you get from claiming freedom or moksha. So in a jiva dominated by sattva, there is perpetuation of particular thought patterns, particularly solitude and knowledge. And these perpetuations become the limitations. One needs to transcend this vritti or modifications to claim freedom. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Karthik. That was an excellent explanation of another important verse describing the nature of sattva guna. It is free from all impurities. It has got of the nature of illumination. It is free from mental restlessness. Niramayaha means free from all diseases. And yet, it can bind. So therefore, although nitya sattvasta is our goal, all the time be sattva, but sattva can be binding because you would want to remain in this condition where you have access to knowledge, when knowledge itself can become a bondage. So we have to understand from sattva, we need to make the jump to Guṇatithaḥ. We go to the last verse for today, which will be explained to us by Dr. Rekha. Dr. Rekha, please.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. To recap just a little, Lord Krishna has taught us that the two principles of Purusha and Prakriti tatvam, also called para and apara, Brahman and Māya, they existed before creation. That is, they are anadi, and they are themselves the cause of creation. We have heard repeatedly that there are 4 differences between Purusha and Prakriti, but I think it's worth repeating. Purusha is Chetana, Nirguna, Nirvikara, Satya Tattvam, while Prakriti is Achetana, Saguna, Savikara, and Mithya. This mixture of consciousness and matter is the cause of creation and is called Ishvara. Lord Krishna uses the father and mother principle, as we have heard in this class, as comparison to explain the cause of creation. And if they are the cause, their features, whether it is Saguna or Nirguna, Chetana, Achetana, etc., they also pervade all their effects, just as gold pervades all ornaments and clay pervades all pottery. Since the Maya principle of creation has gunas, the anatma part of me, that is the body-mind complex or ahankara, has them too. In other words, is saguna. It has all the 3 gunas in varying proportion. We need to know about the gunas because they can be a cause of bondage. As we've heard, another meaning of guna is a binding rope. But that is only if we don't know how to use them properly. And to use them properly, we have to use them as stepping stones towards Jnanam by transcending them. And as we have learned in the previous chapters. In this chapter, Gunatraya Guṇatithaḥ Vibhaga Yoga, Lord Krishna analyzes the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, from 5 angles. We have just heard from Mr. Karthik the Lakshana and Bandhana Prakara of a sattva pradhana person in verse 6. In the next verse, we learn about the qualities of a Rajoguna person. Next slide, please. Coming to the verse, Rajo ragatmakam vidhi trishna sanga samudbhavam tan nibhadnati kaunteya karma sangena dehinam. The translation, O Kaunteya, O Arjuna, understand Rajas to be of the nature of passion and the cause of desire and attachment. It binds the self by causing attachment to activity. Next slide, please. The first line of the verse gives the characteristics of Rajas, the Rajas Lakshanam Prakara, as Raga Trishna Sangha. Raga is something we have come across a lot, and we know it to be attachment, relationship, passion, emotional dependence on external factors. Trishna is the desire for an external thing, whether it is a possession or people. Sangha is holding on. Unlike sattva, which we heard about, Rajas is pravritti pradhana. It doesn't like quietude. Rajas makes one desirous of acquiring things which are not possessed, and once they are acquired, it leads to intense attachment to those possessions. However, we are not critical of Rajoguna because it is necessary to achieve things in samsara. It's also necessary to perform the Pancha Mahayajnas, which we know are preparatory steps. Next slide, please. How does Rajas bind the individual? The second line gives a Rajas Bandhana Prakara as Karma Sangena. Tat Nibadnanti. Rajoguna also binds Dehinam, the individual. How? By Karma Sangena, by making him attached to karma. Now, why is this a bad thing? We know Karma Yoga is absolutely essential for Jnana Yogyata. So after a particular stage, it must be followed by Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga alone is incomplete without subsequent Jnana Yoga. And the problem with a Rajasic person is that he is addicted to work. As Swami Paramatmananda puts it, he is a workaholic. And because of this, he's always in karma. He cannot come to Jnana Yoga. Next slide, please. Even though these three gunas are causes of bondage, for liberation, we have to use these three gunas intelligently as stepping stones and transcend them. That is, evolve from Saguna to Nirguna. So we've already heard the three uses of the uses of the three gunas. We need Rajas for activity to become a karma pradhana person. Tamo is needed for rest in between all these activities. And Sattva is needed to go to Jnana Yoga. Finally, through Shravanam, Mananam and Nididhyasanam, we transcend the gunas to become Guṇatithaḥ. Thank you. Hari Om.
Thank you, Dr. Rekha. Another beautiful explanation of a very crisp verse. So nicely and poetically, the Rajo Guna has been described of the nature of a Raja predominant person and how it can bind. I'm grateful to all the speakers for having done an excellent work in presenting the first 7 verses of the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Our next class will be on the 18th of July, where we will have a revision class on Bhagavad Gita, discovery of inner strength and happiness through the Gita, that is on the 18th of July. We will have a chanting of these 7 verses by Radha Ravi. Over to you, Radha.
अथ चतुर्दशोऽध्यायः गुणत्रयविभागयोगः श्रीभगवानुवाच परं भूयः प्रवक्ष्यामि ज्ञानानां ज्ञानमुत्तमम् यज्ञात्वा मुनयः सर्वे परां सिद्धिमितो गताः इदं ज्ञानमुपाश्रित्य मम साधर्म्यमागताः सर्गेऽपि नोपजायन्ते प्रलयेन व्यतन्ति च मम यो निर्महद्ब्रह्म तस्मिन् गर्भं दधाम्यहम् सम्भवः सर्वभूतानां ततो भवति भारत सर्वयोनिषु कौन्तेय मूर्तयः सम्भवन्ति याः तासां ब्रह्म महद्योनिः अहं बीजः प्रदपिता सत्वं रजस्तम इति गुणा प्रकृतिसम्भवाः निबध्नन्ति महाबाहो देहे देहिनमव्ययम् तत्र सत्वं निर्मलत्वात् प्रकाशकमनामयम् सुखसङ्गेन बध्नाति ज्ञानसङ्गेन चानघ रजो रागात्मकं विद्धि तृष्णासङ्गसमुद्भवम् तन्निबध्नाति कौन्तेय कर्मसङ्गेन देहिनम् हरि ओम् श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरि ओम्.
Thank you, Radha, for a melodious and divine chanting. Thank you all teachers for a wonderful session. Next Friday on 22nd July 2022, we will take up next set of verses in chapter 14. Before that, on Monday, 18th July, Let us log in for Disha 18 at 6:45 p.m. Hari Om. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.